Well, we did have lots of good questions that came in, and then I have some myself to ask to just get us started a little bit. So one of the questions that I would have just to get us started is, can you tell us some of the things that are covered in the course, and what concepts are covered and why you chose those concepts?
Okay. Well, I actually did like an informal survey asking some adults, like, what do you wish that you had known when you became an adult and had to figure out this adulting thing? And so I compiled that list and looked at that. And then I did research on like what's typically covered in consumer math and kind of thought through my own life, things that I wished I had learned earlier on or that had been a challenge for me to figure out. And sorted through all that and figured out what there was space for in the book and kind of moved forward from there. But it covers everything from like the little things, such as decisions you make at the grocery store, the little stuff that we do every day, to big things like your career and the house you're going to buy and that kind of stuff. So it goes, you've got stuff like doubling pan sizes in the kitchen, all the way up to investing your money and buying a car and choosing insurance, different kinds of insurances. So I tried to cover the key things that, that I had realized I needed to know or that other people had shared they wish they knew as well.
Yeah, and I love all of the things that you've added into the
Turn
course.
my light on here.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Okay.
I mean, all of the different things you've added into the course, I think, are extremely helpful. I agree. There are things that I wish that I would have known as I entered adulthood.
Yes.
And so it sounds like you have chosen topics that are going to prepare our high school students to be successful adults with their finances.
Yes. And not just successful in a worldly idea of successful, but successful in being a biblical steward, like recognizing that God owns everything and he's entrusted to us whatever little or much he has. And so all of that is not about, like, I don't want them to just learn how to pinch pennies so that they can amass a fortune, right? I want them to learn how to live like our generous God and how to view all their resources as under his control, where God's the master, not money. Because the Bible talks a lot about money and warns us that the love of money is the root of evil, right? So we don't want that to become our master. We don't want that to be our rule. And it's really easy when you're trying to teach like wise saving and wise, spending and meeting goals for money itself to become the goal, if that makes sense, rather than keeping all of those goals under God's control and him being the true king of our hearts and master of our money. And so that's really was my heart in writing this, was to help students learn to really get the math they needed, get the skills they needed, get the overview of the concepts and decisions they'd have to face, but really get it all from that biblical worldview so they were not sucked into worldly thinking as they went through that.
Yeah, I personally appreciate that about the course. I noticed as I've been skimming through it that you even cover giving and how to properly give. And I personally appreciate that as a parent that's going to be covering this with my high schooler, my 17-year-old senior. And so the concepts you've brought in are helpful to me as a parent to be able to better prepare him because, kids they listen to mom and dad, but it's also good to see this in black and white
Yes.
and to be able to present these things to them in that way.
Yes.
With all of that being said, the different concepts that are covered, looking through it, does each concept build upon each other, or is this something where if a family wanted to cover one particular area of the course, they could tackle that unit together?
It's a really good question. There is some graduation in that, like in the quarter 2, they really learn a lot about budgeting. Some of quarter 3 refers back to some of those budgeting concepts. So there may be some, and I tried to incorporate review in the problems as well. So there may be some things that if you skip around, a student would go, oh, I don't know how to do this particular thing. But if a parent's prepared to explain that or fill in that gap, you could. You certainly could read and understand the general concepts out of order, but some of the math builds, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So like I teach parentheses at one point and working with those. And if a student is at a later point and didn't already know that from a previous math course, they might need to look back. But there is an index in the back of the book and a table of contents where you can kind of figure out where those pieces are if you do come across something that you realize, oops, we needed to have covered this first. So it wasn't necessarily designed to skip around, but I feel like you could, if so long as you were prepared that if you hit something, you were going to explain it or look back in the index to find where it was explained.
So mentioning that and the building upon, and you talked about concepts that need to be known beforehand. One of our questions today, I know, was Melissa C., and she wanted to double check and see if pre-algebra, Principles of Math 1 and Principles of Math 2, is that enough of a prerequisite? Do they need to have completed an algebra before this course? What are your thoughts on that?
So that is the prerequisite. You need to have had pre-algebra. However, the typical flow through high school is Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2. And the reason for that is if they're college bound, they're going to be taking their SAT or their whatever college entrance exam they're going to take, typically in 11th grade. And they need to have already had their algebra and geometry before that, because that will be on that exam. Consumer math will not be on that exam, which is why typically people will wait and do consumer math in 12th grade when the required elements are completed. But you can go out of order, and if you know your child's not going to college or the college they're going to doesn't require as much math, then certainly you could change that up. But typically the recommended order is the Algebra 1 and Geometry first to get those required things out of the way with before they would have to take any college entrance exams.
Okay. Yes.
Not college entrance exams, high school, the SAT and ACT.
Yes.
What I mean.
Yes. But so if a student isn't doing that, they could have just pre-algebra and go right into consumer math.
They can, yes. Pre-algebra is the only thing that was required to understand the consumer math. But that's just something to keep in the back of your mind as far as when you're deciding which order to go with it.
Thank you. That is helpful. And that is a frequent question we get as well, of why the order of high school math and why students aren't going right from Algebra 1 to Algebra 2. So thank you for answering that and adding that tidbit in there.
Well, and the reason with the Algebra 1, Algebra 2, not only do you want the geometry done before those tests, but you also, in the geometry, Jacob's Geometry has Algebra 1 review in it. So then you're getting a little bit more solid on that before you jump into the Algebra 2. Would be the other reason there.
So looking at this course, we have the student book, we have the teacher's guide, and then we also have the solutions manual and the case studies. Yes. So that to our customers, they're accustomed to the student book and the teacher's guide, but we have these new components. So can you just kind of explain the difference? What's included in the student book? What's in the teacher's guide, solutions manual, and case studies?
Sure. The student book is the text. It does the teaching, explains the concepts, works out examples for the students. The teacher guide has your schedule, has your exercises to do, and has just an answer key. So that's literally just the answer to the problem, not showing how that answer was obtained. If you want to see how the answer was obtained, that's in the solutions manual, because I felt like there would be some moms who would want to have it, where they could see, how did she get this answer as they go through problems. So that's why we did a solutions manual as well. So that's available if you want the step-by-step. This is how that answer was obtained for most of the problems. And then the case studies is a free download that goes with it. There were just additional stories of biblical stewardship in action that I wanted to include or have students be able to have the option to read. And so those are in that file that can be downloaded. I'm hoping that all students will choose to opt to do those additional case studies, because I feel like they're listed as optional, but they're really, really good examples. And I feel like actions speak louder than words sometimes, right? When you see somebody live out biblical stewardship, it really helps you understand what is being talked about.
Yeah, I think that's a very neat additional component that you've added to the course that will help just solidify that with the students. So I'm thankful to have that part added. So this course is a full high school credit, one full year.
Yes.
Okay. And for some reasons, many people think, oh, well, this might be just a quick little half credit consumer math, but it is a good course loaded with lots of good information, and you've definitely given enough in there for this to be a good full year course for a high school student for sure.
Right. And it's
Um,
a full year math credit. Now, if a student were like really good at math and we're trying to go into a higher level math course beyond Algebra 2, and so didn't have room to fit the consumer math in and needed to do it alongside a math course, it could be counted as an elective. It does cover everything a personal finance course would cover too. It just goes a lot further than that, so it would be a heavy elective. But that is an option, but only students that are really good at math should try that, because otherwise it's going to be way too much math for the average student.
Okay, and thank you because we have Rachel Moss asked, I have a math loving kid who is wanting to go through consumer math along with geometry in the upcoming school year. Do you think that this will be too much? So if they love math, you think it's okay and do this as like an elective finance math?
I think you know your child best and you'll know if it's overwhelming for them. It would be overwhelming for many students. However, if a student is really gifted in math, I feel like they might be okay doing that. I would just be prepared to pause if they're not and prepared to save it. But it's certainly something that could be tried. They just need to understand it is going to be a heavier elective than some.
Thank you for that and that explanation of that. I think we'll have some math loving kids that will want to do both.
Yeah.
I don't have one of those, but I know there are those out there.
Yes.
And so some other questions that we have, Caitlin Morris asked one of these, could adults use this course?
Absolutely. In fact, as I wrote it, I learned things, and I kind of hoped that as students went through it, their parents would have conversations with them and learn and be blessed by it as well. Yes.
And then what do you think, Caitlin, also want to know, what do you think sets this course apart from other finance math courses that we might have available for our high school students?
There's quite a few different things. I think probably the biggest is that it's not overwhelming, but it's still thorough. You have a lot of courses that are just personal finance courses, which don't really get into a lot of the math side of it. Or you have courses that are so in detailed with the math that you kind of can lose the big picture. And what I tried to do was make sure that there was enough of both for the student to get what they needed without feeling overwhelmed in any way. And then the graphic design team did such an amazing job laying it out where it's like full color, which not everyone is, and where the colors are used to help teach the concept. So like when we went through different examples in the textbook or the student book, there's color coding so that you can see where the different numbers came from. So you can follow along really easily visually with what's going on. We kept it to 2 pages per day that you would read, and then the exercise is a front and a back as well. So it's like not an overwhelming number of pages to look at or problems to solve. It also introduces spreadsheets, which I'm not sure all of them do, because I wanted students to understand ways that they could use technology to do some of these things, because we live in the 21st century and that's becoming more and more what people do. But we also wanted to be very careful to not have students use the internet or wind up places where they shouldn't. And so anything that requires the internet has a parent, they need to ask their parents first, and it's optional. But I teach them some of the skills of using a spreadsheet and of make them aware of things that they could do research online if they needed to, so that they have those different tools in their tool belt as they enter into adulthood, but in a safe way. And I also included in your own life problems, but tried not to make it like, sometimes you get out of the box assignments and it's just a lot of work for the parent to figure out, right? And I didn't want that. I get moms are busy. You don't need a lot of extra work. So there are opportunities for the student to apply it in their own life, but I tried really hard to guide them through that as much as possible and give very clear grading instructions so that it doesn't become something that's overwhelming, but that they do have opportunities to apply it in their own life right now, as well as in the future. And then above all, really that biblical perspective that's through it. I have not seen that in any other consumer math course. And that's why I agreed to write one, is because I felt like that's most important thing, right? That we need. And I want students to be prepared to approach their finances from a biblical perspective.
Yes. And as we mentioned before, that's such an important thing for them to learn as they're entering into adulthood, that they have an accountability and a responsibility to be good stewards for the Lord with their money. And so it's a very helpful addition that you've added into the course to bring some things to their mind that they might not have thought about before, or might not even think as they're doing another consumer math course. So thank you for those additions. And then quizzes and tests, are they included? How often are they included?
They are. So every lesson is 10 days, so 2 weeks basically. And there's a quiz at the end of each of the lessons, except for every quarter has just a 5-day lesson, and that ends with a test. So there's 4 tests and a final exam, and then there's, I know that takes a number, but a quiz for every lesson that doesn't end in a test. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that sounds like it has a good amount of assessment for families
Yes.
that are looking for that.
Yeah.
For sure. A couple of questions that we have here too within the app. A mom of boys said she's excited for her students to do this class. She'd love for her oldest to take it this year for 9th grade, but she's scared that he'll forget things from Principles of Math 2 that he needs for algebra. Is there enough practice in consumer math to keep them sharp for algebra if they decided to go right from Principles of Math to consumer math?
I think so, yes. But again, I would encourage that mom to think about, does that child need to have their algebra and geometry done because they're going to take the SAT or ACT and want those completed beforehand? So that would just be another thing to think about with that. But yes, there is pre-algebra in there that I think they would still be okay by the end of it to switch back to algebra.
Okay. Nareda asks, how would be the best way to use this in like a weekly co-op?
And that was a great question. I saw that one as I was checking them beforehand. Because each lesson is 2 weeks, so you could introduce a lesson and then you would have another co-op on that same lesson. So you could assign some of the optional assignments for the students, or some of the in your own life problems for the students to then like report back that second time. So like the first lesson or the first week could be an introduction to the lesson, going over things that you think might be places where students would have more questions. And then the next one can be more of like showing their work and going over some of the assignments that they did. There are assignments in there that where students research or read their Bibles and write down what different passages say related to the topic at hand. So that would make great discussions in co-ops, I feel like, as they share what they wrote for those different open-ended questions.
Kind of along the same lines of meeting once a week and then having to do assignments separately. We had a question from Stacy Westbrook, and she said that her 17-year-old stepson will be completing this course. He lives full-time with his birth mother and is in public school. He was excited to take a course like this on his own. She says, I know the schedule is just a suggestion, but how easy would it be for him to read a lesson throughout the week, then go and answer all the worksheets to do the lessons on the weekends? She said it's easy for him to read during the week, but we'll have to complete the worksheets on the weekends. On the weeks he is not with us, he will send us pictures that he's completed it. So basically he's reading in the week and then doing all the assignments on the weekend. What do you think about that and how that will work with it?
It really depends on the student. If you have a student who takes a long time to solve problems, then that could get frustrating. If you have a student who gets through their math problems pretty quickly, and by math problems, just think about how they would do with a pre-algebra sheet, because it's at a pre-algebra level. So if they could take a pre-algebra sheet and solve it pretty quickly, then they might not have any trouble doing that all over the weekend. If that would take them hours to get through a pre-algebra sheet, then that might end up being frustrating for them. But I would also encourage that mom, like if he's not doing it for credit, like he's already getting his credits elsewhere, he may not have to do every problem. You know, that could be something that you look at and just kind of, if he's just mainly trying to get the concepts and already has that math under his belt, like it could be that he doesn't solve every single problem.
That's a good point of just doing evens or odds or ones that,
Right.
okay, that is a good point. Casey Lloyd asks, what is the financial philosophy behind consumer math? I come from a family of entrepreneurs and business owners. My husband is also decided to start his own business a few years after we were married. I hesitate to do financial courses because they are often written from the perspective of an employee and not an entrepreneur.
Well, that's not a problem here. I own my own business, have for over 20 years. So I'm coming at it from the perspective of an entrepreneur, but trying to prepare students for whichever way the Lord calls them to. So we cover things that would be important if you were an employee, but we also cover things that would be important if you were self-employed, and kind of give the student an understanding of both options so that they can really pray and decide which way they would need to go. As far as the perspective, we really tried to stay away from anything that was denominational and really just focus on what does the Bible teach. And the Bible teaches us that God's a giving God, right? And so he wants us to reflect his image. He wants us to be giving people. And what does that look like? And what does it look like and it teaches us that debt enslaves, right? So we want to try to be very careful about debt and looking at, just different, as we look at each different part of consumer math, we try to look at the scriptures. And on things where Christians disagree, I encourage them to talk to their parents and to look at the Bible verses for themselves. But it's really designed to try to help the students explore what God says for themselves. But it is from the perspective of, we don't want money to be our master. We want God to be our master. And we want to view everything he's given us as his, that we're just a steward of. It's not that we just put aside 10% and say, this is God's, the rest is mine, I can do whatever I want. It's that, no, everything is God's. And we're trying to steward it all for his kingdom. And that looks different in different seasons and for different people. But really trying to pray through that and teach the student how to make decisions biblically. When I was a young person, I remember my first decisions, I was petrified I was going to get this wrong, right? And you there's that huge weight of not getting it wrong. And so I try to help students understand biblical principles like seeking wise counsel and praying and having their mind renewed by the word of God daily so that they're prepared and keeping eternity as their focus and checking their heart. Are they just seeking things for themselves, or are they keeping their heart focused on the Lord? And things like that as we go through all the different decisions and aspects of finance. Does that answer the question?
Yes, that does.
Okay.
That's helpful.
Okay.
Emily B asks, and we're getting some questions in that I know you haven't read previously.
Okay. All right.
And she says that being that the course can't be more than one school year, were there any topics you thought about including but opted to leave out?
There were. I mean, we had to obviously cut in order. That's one of the challenges of being an author, is there's always more that you want to say than you have space to say. But I don't think, I'm trying to remember what they even were. I'm not sure I could say off the top of my head. But I think we managed to find ways to cover things more broadly. I had to cut some of the details of some things out, but I think we managed to keep the main concepts that I felt like needed to be in there. And then students can obviously go in more depth on their own if they want to learn further. And in fact, there's even the very last lesson in the book I put as optional, but I hope people will opt in because it's where we go into some of the things that would be helpful on the job, whether you're owning your own business or whether you're working for somebody. Understanding a little bit about income statements and business statement balance sheets can really help you manage and understand what the employer is looking at, or if you have your own business, help you as you're making decisions. So we just touch on those things. Now you could have a whole course on business finance, right? But it's touched on there and it's optional. You can opt out of that lesson if you want to. We also touch on some investing concepts that, again, there's whole courses written on, but I wanted students to have enough of the big picture that if they got financial advice one day, they would know what questions to ask and be able to assess, wait a minute, is this really good advice or bad advice? Not enough that they would be able to go become expert investors on their own, right? But enough that they would not be snookered by a bad deal either. And so that's kind of the approach I took to deciding what to put in and what to put as, like what are the core things that they really need to know on these different topics. And then they can go on to learn more if that's an area of interest to them, but I want to make sure that they're prepared with the essentials.
Thank you. So we have Masterbooks Academy course with this,
Yes.
and it's live now. So the book
Yes.
is here and available, and the course is live also, which is amazing, the timing of that for families and students. So this Academy course is a little different than some of our other courses and the other courses that you've offered in the past. It includes some additional features like auto grading, interactive labs, and then also it says that they have access to the instructor for this one. And so can you just talk about the Academy course, all that's included, what makes it different?
Sure. Yeah. Well, actually, all of mine offer access to the instructor because I want to make sure parents are not worried about math, that they can get through high school. But we got feedback from courses, and Masterbooks had shared some of that with me, and that people wanted auto-graded quizzes and tests. And I'm like, all right, I guess we're going to do it. So we did it. And then there was also a request for more detailed examples than what's in the textbook for students who need to see more. And so that's where I tried really hard as I was going through the e-course to not just teach exactly what was in the textbook, but to also add in additional content as appropriate to help students really understand it and have a chance to see it. So like with the spreadsheets, in the book, it'll show you a screenshot, but in a video, I can actually walk through and show you how I got that screenshot in the textbook so that students get to see all of that without necessarily having to even open up a spreadsheet if they don't ever want to, but at least they're aware if that's a skill they need at some point down the road. So the general way the e-course works is they would watch the video and then they would work problems in the teacher guide on their exercise, and they would look at that student book as they needed to. So the student book would be like their reference, and they could read. Some students may want to read the student book every day. Some students may just want to spot read it or use it as they need to as they're going through questions. But the videos are typically around 10 minutes ish, and it's me presenting the lesson and then also other information as needed.
Thank you. So if a family wants to read first and then watch, or they want to watch first and then read, do you think it could be done either way? Or
Sure. I mean, absolutely. You can do it either way. I did it with the intention of watching first and then reading, but you can certainly go about it the other way if you want to. And the e-course is not just me like with a picture of me. I have animated slides that I'm using to like literally walk through the lessons together.
Thank you. Just the preview, it looks really, again, just amazingly well done. So I thank you for all of the extra effort and extra activities and work that you put into the course.
A lot of late nights. I'll tell you what, this is the first one I did with a child. We have a son that we adopted, and so trying to find quiet times where I could record, and it was a lot of late nights, but I hope it'll be a blessing.
Thank you. We appreciate the sacrifice for us on this side too, for those of us that are going to be using the course this year. Anything else about the course overall that maybe we haven't asked or that you want to share with us?
Let me check my notes for a second. Well, I guess I wanted to share a little bit about like what got me started in it. Like I think some of you may have read some of my other books and know that I got started writing about math because as a high schooler, I was blown away when I realized, wait, math's not neutral. God is in math, right? And this was a little bit of a different aspect of math, looking at consumer math. But when Masterbooks asked me about it, I decided to take it on because I knew that even though I'd been homeschooled and had a consumer math course, I hadn't really felt truly prepared for life when I launched. There were so many things that it was like, oh, how do I do this? And that came through a lot of struggle. I had been prepared to be frugal. My parents had taught me how to grocery shop frugally and all that. But I hadn't really understood all that God had to say about money. And so I wanted to go on that journey for myself, which I got to do as I was preparing for this. And I just wanted to help others avoid that overwhelmed feeling of like, oh no, how do I really budget? Because it can be very overwhelming when you start out on your own. And so hopefully this will help make that transition easier for others. And I've been amazed. There's over 2,000 verses on money in the Bible. It's a lot. God has so much to say about this. And so I'm really excited that students will get to grapple with those concepts for themselves before they're out on their own trying to figure it out. And let's see. Oh, and it covers taxes. I don't know if we mentioned that before. So I remember being very overwhelmed with taxes when it came tax time the first time. So this will give them those big picture things so that they won't be overwhelmed even if they take it to an accountant one day, they'll understand what the accountant's talking about, right? Or they'll understand what their computer program is telling them. And college, when I first started researching college, it was like, how in the world do you sort through all these different options and how do you save, and it can add up. And so the college lesson is going to teach students different ways that they can save. And I got my degree by testing out of a lot of things. And so I share some things that I had to do a lot of research to figure out myself, and that I hope will help students then already have a foundation for them to launch into their research on what they need to do, as well as non-college options. There's a lot of different other ways to prepare for different careers, and so that's covered in there. Again, my goal was to just share all the different ways and thoughts and allow students to be able to have that big picture to pray through and talk to their families about. So yeah, I think that was the other thing that I wanted to just share. Yeah. I'm excited about the course. I can't believe it's finally done. It's been the Lord's grace.
I know it's been a labor of love for you for a little while now.
Yes.
And
it's kind of like, what am I supposed to do now? There's no consumer math.
And in the comments, there are so many people thanking you for all of your hard work on it as well. And so a couple of questions in the comments that I want to point out that maybe we haven't covered. And some of them you have touched on, but one of the questions is, in the Masterbooks Academy course, do you actually work out problems from the lesson, like a new lesson or a new concept? Are you actually working them out on the board step by step at all in there, or is it just additional work?
Yes. So I'm trying to make sure I understand the question.
Like a question. So I think what she's asking is, when there's a question in the textbook, are you going over any of those problems from the textbook step by step in your teaching in the video lessons?
So in the textbook, there's examples, right? In the teacher guide is where there's problems. So I'm not sure which one she's referring to.
From the teacher's guide. So with a new so if a student is given a problem, do you go through any of those problems from the teacher's guide step by step for them?
So I tried to go over similar problems, but not the exact same, because if I do their problems, then they're not getting a chance to do their work, right? But there were some where I knew it was stretching them in different ways. And so I, in the video, would sometimes do screenshots and highlight different things to watch for and explain a little bit more details about that problem and how to approach it or give them hints, but not actually solve that particular problem. But I definitely did for every lesson try to go, okay, do they have everything they need to solve these problems? Is there anything that could trip a student up? And if there was, I tried to address that in one way or another in the video without making it so they don't have to actually do the work. Does that make sense?
Yes. Which that's what's helpful. That's what also helps to keep the lessons short and not overwhelming, because if you did go through every problem, that would make those video lessons much longer than they are. So it's helpful that you are just teaching the lesson and then allowing the student to do the work on the consumable worksheet. And then the solutions, and for this mom that's asking, the solutions manual will give that step by step, which I know is going to be so appreciated by many of us, because that is something that we are asked about and want often, are those step by step answers. So thank you for that solutions manual.
And the solutions manual comes free when you get the Academy course. So if you get the e-course, you get the solutions manual. And so you have that to look at if there was a question. And if you still have a question, you can email me and I will answer it. And then I'll know that's something I need to clarify more for everybody else too. But I really tried to think through the questions that students would have and address those.
So thank you for pointing that out, that the solutions manual comes free with the purchase of the Academy, because that's a perk of getting the Academy course. And for those watching, so for masterbooks.com, the physical textbook, it's a physical textbook for the student book and the teacher's guide. And then the solutions manual is available in a digital format. So it's not another physical book that you're getting, but you get that digital format for free when you enroll in the Masterbooks Academy course, along with a lot of other great things in interactive, personalized grading, all of that that you're going to want with Masterbooks Academy course. So lots of good perks with this Academy course for sure. Discussion within the course about marriage and money and marriage and being a husband and wife. Is any of that covered in the course?
I did not go into that in the course. I was just focusing on the biblical principles, but we didn't go into working that through with a spouse.
And you're just hitting the basics again, as you said.
There's so much you can cover. And these are high schoolers, and one editor kept reminding me, like, you have to interest them where they're at now, not just where they need to go, right? So I tried to address, make everything practical for where they are while teaching them where they needed to go. So in a marriage, like, they would have those biblical principles to then look at the scriptures with their spouse and talk that through and decide together what they were going to do. We just didn't specifically say this is what you would do with a spouse.
Okay. So I have a little bit of clarification about our question and you writing out and working through the problem on the Academy. Okay. And Michelle says, sorry if that was confusing. When a new lesson is taught, is the math written out on video in the Academy, or is it just slides?
Oh, so I use animated slides. So it goes step by step, but the numbers appear as I talk it through, if that makes sense. So no, I'm not handwriting because I have sloppy handwriting. I'm using slides, but the slide isn't just like a screenshot of the whole thing finished. It's going through it step by step, and things are appearing up on the screen as I'm talking about it.
Okay, that's helpful. And then Caitlin Morris pointed out, which I did not mention, that the case studies are also a download, and those are a free download. So those come free whether you're purchasing this physical books or in the Academy. Everyone has access to those case studies, which Catherine mentioned that she hopes everyone uses those. Because they are free. And so that it's, we don't really have an excuse not to use them. And you've made it easy for us by allowing us to have those for free. And so I do think we're probably going to get some more questions about the case studies, because that is very new for math. So could you maybe tell like one example of what would be a case study that they're going to get with that?
Sure. Can I clarify one thing before I jump into that as you were talking? With the case studies that come in the download, so there's some case studies that are in the textbook, and then there's others that are in the download. So it's like the additional ones are in the download, but there are some sprinkled throughout the student text itself. In the exercises that are in the teacher guide, it tells you when to read the different case studies. So it will remind you to look in the case study download. You don't have to try to figure out when to do what case study. It will remind you. That's helpful. Okay. Basically, I typically did them at the end of every lesson. So as they're preparing for the quiz for that lesson, then they'll also do a case study that relates to what they studied in that lesson where possible. So examples would be, so we worked with Generous Giving to get some of they gave us permission to use some of the examples they had, and write them up. And one of them was this group of people in a very poor area in India, I believe it was, who just put aside a handful of rice at every meal to give to the Lord. And they've been able to send missionaries abroad on those handfuls of rice. And so it just shows, like, it doesn't matter how little you have. I mean, they're living meal to meal, but they were able to still find a way to be generous. And then there's other stories like R.G. Letourneau, who was very gifted at designing earth moving machines. And he ended up very successful in his business, but he viewed God as his partner, and he was really serious about that, which meant God called the shots. And so the way he made decisions, he was putting God first and doing things that were hard, sometimes financially, like forgiving debts when he needed to, rather than take a Christian brother to court and stuff like that. And then took seriously the need to be giving, that we are called as Christians to be giving. And so he started tithing, and then as the Lord blessed him, he started giving more and more and more. And eventually he reverse tithed. He was giving 90% away and keeping 10%. And it was like the more he did, the more God just gave him more and more stuff. And he ended up being able to travel all around the country sharing the gospel by speaking to businessmen about the Lord, because of what had happened through all this. So it's story after story. Then there's this other couple that chose to live on a medium income, as if they had a medium income, even though they had more than that, in order to be able to be more generous. And just some of the different ways people grappled with, like, what are we supposed to do with the resources that God's entrusted to us? So those are just a couple that are coming to my mind. But some of them are from the Bible too. Like, we looked at different people in the Bible and how they made decisions. Because a lot of consumer math is decisions, right? When you go grocery shopping, you're deciding whether you're going to pay the extra to have your vegetables chopped up, or whether you're going to chop them yourself. Or, I mean, you're making all these decisions, or whether you're going to buy the pre-done meal that you can just throw in the oven. Like, you have all these decisions that you're facing, or if you're going to go out to eat and spend even more. So, like, we make decisions all the time. And to understand how to do that biblically, we looked at some case studies of people in the Bible and the decisions they made, good and bad. We looked at case studies in the Bible with managing money. So some of the case studies came from the Bible, some came from different people in history, some from generous giving, but we were just trying to find ways to illustrate the different concepts we were looking at.
Thank you. So I have just kind of been scrolling through the comments, because what happens when we do these lives is the live comments disappear. And so then we post the replay and new comments come up for questions being asked after the replay. But I wanted to share some of them with you, because you're not going to get to see them. But so many are jumping on and just thanking you, as I mentioned, and then just saying that they love this course. They love all the things that you've covered in the course. They are excited to learn alongside with their student, because there are many things that they did not get well prepared for when they were in high school in order to enter adulthood. So lots of comments like that, and just super excited about the Academy and the additional features there that you've added. And some are saying they've already done a financial course before, but they think they're going to do this one too, because of, as you've mentioned, just that the perspective that you brought to this math, and just being a good steward of what God has given us. And I know that for me and for many of us, with your principles of math, you did bring to us for the first time the thoughts of math not being neutral, and that it was created by our Creator, who set order. And so to now bring that perspective to the finance math side of it, we are very thankful for all that you've done there. And so I just definitely wanted you to know that there are many people in the comments that are.
Well, you can thank the Lord, because it was truly, I sometimes I look back, we ended up taking a foster baby in the middle of it all. And I don't know how it all got done, but God just was very faithful. So, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he does with it.
Yeah, we are too. And thank you once again for all that you've done. And thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's
And
fun.
this has been a great live, and I know it's going to be helpful for many, just even in the future. This will be something that we reference frequently, I'm sure, and share with the customers as they are asking about consumer math. So thank you once again for joining us, and we are all excited to jump in and let you know what we think of it.
All right. Well, I will look forward to the feedback. It's good to meet you. Thank you for having me.